peli, peli, que soy muy astuta, soy la más. Dame dinerita, na, na, na. Para las uñitas, guau, guau, guau. Quiero más piedritas, guau, guau, guau. Dame ropita.
For you all. We'll get started.
Na, na, na. Quiero estar bonita, guau, guau, guau. Quiero más ropita, guau, guau, guau. Dame ropita. Dame ropita. Quiero dinerita. Dame ropita. Dame, dame, dame.
All right, everyone. Muy buenos dias, good afternoon if you are on the East Coast. I am here on the West Coast. My name is Jose Richard Aviles. I am honored and thrilled to be a part of this conversation and to be... Listen, this is what happens when you get an urban planner who is a poet and a performer. I may not have a stage, but I got a frame and I'm about to perform. Buenos dias, everyone. Again, I am super excited to be here. And this session is called Healing the Built Environment. And this session is basically just, oh, here, let me share the screens again. Well, hold on. Well, this session is just sort of, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. I was fortunate to not too long ago publish a Viewpoint article with APA called Planners as Therapists, Cities as Clients. And it's looking at the intersections between social work and urban planning. And thank you. Thank you. Y'all, I had a lot to say. It was one of, and I still have a lot to say. 600 words was not enough. Listen, and this is what's going to happen. At some point when I'm done talking here, I'm going to ask folks to join me in the conversation. I love the other panels, and y'all had a whole entourage. Let me tell you about, I'm ready to spend my cardies. I was in the other session on people power currency. Yo, I'm ready for my cardies. So I'm gonna invite y'all to come in and let's have a conversation. I just like to be your tia of South Central, and I'm here to spill the tea, y'all. Let's spill the tea, spin them cardies. Yes, okay. Let me share this presentation and we'll get started. Yes, of course. Oh, thank you. Okay, so let's get started. Dice, healing the built environment. You can still see the thing. How do you do this? Oh gosh. So the tab, and I'm doing this one and share. There, it makes it look all nice. Okay, there you go. All right. So this is kind of how I frame myself and how I center myself. Wild tongues can't be tamed. They can only be cut, said by the amazing lesbian Chicana Gloria Anzaldúa. And this is how I do my work. I am a wild tongue and it will not be tamed. And of course, Norman Krumholtz, one of the first writers and folks to talk about advocacy and planning, provide a wider range of choices for those who have few. This is my MO. This is how I see myself doing the work that I do. So I'm excited to share that with y'all. So again, who am I? First and foremost, I am born and raised in South Central. I am a very proud Angelino, born and raised on Tongva land, South Central. And yes, there are so many situations and identities that explain who I am, but more importantly, I'm a bus rider, and I'm not a planner that is like, listen, I decided to not have a car anymore to reduce my carbon footprint. I just couldn't afford a car. I grew up in the low-income community, and then when I could afford a car, I said, no, thank you. Been riding the bus the whole time. It's where I discovered my queerness, and all of my organizing comes with the Bus Riders Union. So always give a shout out to the BRU. That's where I come from. And I have a BA in dance from St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. Now, a queer Latino from South Central ended up at a Norwegian Lutheran college 10 years later, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But dance is what I love. Dance is my passion. Cal's College is in Contentment. Okay, Northfield. Northfield. Yes, y'all. Cal's College in Contentment. That is the model of Northfield, Minnesota. Again, that's a whole nother story. Of urban planning. Now, when I applied to the planning program, I talked about that for me as a dancer and a choreographer, My job is to create space within space. As a choreographer, you give me a theater and I create a world. And to me, that was also a form of design. So as I applied at the planning program, I was like, I'm interested in the choreography of the city. And people were like, Richard, what does that mean? And I was like, I don't know. But then I taught a class at University of Redlands called Choreographing the City. And then it kind of made sense. So today we're going to talk a little bit about social work practice. Muchas gracias, Misha. Muchas gracias. And keep sending in the questions. Again, I'm gonna invite y'all to come into this conversation when I'm done with this little presentation. Let's talk. I want to make sure that y'all can see I can keep going by myself in this room. So I need some space with you all. Okay. Oh, cool. Sorry. I get distracted. Okay. So yeah, what we're going to be talking about today are these different perspectives that I talked about in the article, right? We're going to talk about strengths perspective, systems theory, countertransference, and case management. And the graphic that you're seeing on the side, this is a graphic that explains the person and environment perspective. As social workers, when we work with our client, we start at the individual level, right? And we begin to build the systems approach. And we have the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem, as you see in the slide. And we begin to think about what is the relationship that this individual has in all of those different spheres. Oh, my bad. No. All right, so let's start with the first one, and this is strengths perspective. As you see at the image that you're seeing there, this is what we call an eco map. And in an eco map, again, in this example, we have our green circle, Harry, that is our client, and we begin to see what are the relationships that Harry has, right? We see there's Sam, the mom, there's Jason, the younger brother, and that is all the microsystem, right? That is the family. Then there's the extended family, Aunt Eve, Denzel. We begin to see all of those things. What you're seeing at the bottom, okay. Yes. What you're beginning to then see, y'all want to join the conversation? Let's go. Come on. I see folks coming in. Yes. Bring it in here. Let's go. Let's chat. So we'll begin to see on the side. Hi, Chelsea.
You're all doing right. Sorry, I think my computer just freaked out.
Oh, no problem. I was like, y'all want to come into the tea? Let's do it. You know, we're going to pretend like this is a talk show. So we'll begin to see on the relationships, right? What are the solid line, the dashed line, and the slash line? Those are the relationships and the dynamics of the relationships, right? So we see that the solid line is a strong relationship, then there's a weak relationship, stressful relationship. And that legend is very important in how we as social workers are then able to understand how the person sees themselves and then sees himself in relationship to other people. That is called object relation theory. Let me type this in here. I'm about to give y'all a whole relationship theory. And that is super important to talk about because this becomes then a way that our clients' personal, communal, and environmental strength and the role that they play in the journey to healing, right? Everyone has a role in this conversation. And so that's what we want to talk about. Then the question then becomes, how do we find strength as social workers? One of the things that we always talk about in social work practice is showing up is half the battle, right? Showing up to community spaces as planners is half the battle. The second half of the battle is then actually honoring the community that we're showing up in, right? As opposed to, different situations. Oh, questions coming in already. How do you see trauma be integrated into planning? What's the role? Okay. Yes. We're going to get to that part. So in the finding the strength perspective, first and foremost, I think this is a very important part in how you find strength in social work. We begin by reframing, right? And in order to reframe, we as artists have the power of metaphor, and metaphor teaches us to unlearn patterns to then relearn new patterns, right? And that reframing is where you're able to find the strength. In planning, this is what we call asset-based planning, right? So rather, for example, how many folks, I don't know if folks know this, but for a long time, South Central was trying to be called South LA, right? And to sort of reframe and relearn the history of violence of that history of violence that is in South Central. But many of us who were born and raised here still call this place South Central. This is not South LA. And again, it's that base and saying, but what would happen if we reframed South Central as a place of resiliency as opposed to everything else, right? So this is, again, to me, person and environment perspective is very important because I think it's a little bit different in how we are trained as planners. As planners, there are two types of planners, and I think I said this in the article. There are planners who romanticize the idea of the city, folks who enjoy your Olmsteds, your Le Corbusiers, and basically your white men in the planning field. And then you have folks like myself who join the planning profession to defend and preserve our hoods. Right, you know, in difference between neighborhood and hood, right, and what that means. And to me, I think one of the things that happened a lot of the times in the planning field was that we were told to y'all going in, right? Told to romanticize the city, and we looked at the city and the built environment as the object as opposed to the subject, right? So we had this idea, we looked at the environment and said we're going to change the environment, and then people kind of fall in place. That, my friends, Laura Mulvey would call the male gaze. Like and don't get me started on Susan Sontag and Notes on Camp. Like this idea that we are gods and then can change and the city, that's person and environment perspective really looks at the community at the center of our design process, right? And I say in the article, and if community members are the ones who are not in agreement with your design, then you need to go back to the drawing board, no matter how long it takes, because we are here to be of service, not to be serviced. And if somebody says, reminds me of Jane Addams sips tea. Y'all, funny, quick little story moving into the next part. So in social work practice, there is someone named Jane Addams, and she is seen as the mother of social work. And I remember being like, oh, okay, listen, I'm gonna be real because this is this space. I will not have a white woman be a mother of anything I'm associated to. So no, Jane Addams. And then I went over to planning, and then there was Jane Jacobs, and I was like, what is this? The curse of the Janes? Oh man. Strengths perspective. Countertransference. Countertransference, countertransference is something that we use all the time in social work practice. And this is just a reminder that this is not about us. And I think this is so important in the planning field, right? I think when I was in school, folks always talked about that it was architects that came in with ego and that had all this arrogance about building their stuff. Let me tell you something, planners, they have a lot of ego too, y'all. Some of these white planners that I was in school with, they had a lot of ego. And again, countertransference reminds us that the only true experts are our clients and the community. It's the lived experience that should be leveraged and seen as truth. And I made a mistake, that should be capital T truth. And even when planners don't connect with them, right? Like as myself as a social worker, there were moments and times where I had clients that I couldn't connect to the narratives, but my job was always to show up and be present and of service to my clients. Now, countertransference can look many types of ways. So from a social work perspective, this could be like, for example, let's say I have a client who reminds me of my mother. Oh, excuse me, y'all. See the tea's good. It got me on burping and stuff. This just reminded me of Wendy Williams when she burps. How you doing? But let's say I have a client that reminds me of my mother, and I may not have a really good relationship with my mom. And this is not true. But let's say that is the case, right? And let's say my client doesn't show up once, and all of a sudden this is triggering all these things in me because my mom didn't show up to my recital when I was 7 years old, right? So then all of a sudden I'm calling my client and being like, girl, you need to show up. I am going beyond my scope of work for my client because they remind me of my mom. Now, this is an example, but of countertransference. And it's basically the biases that we bring as therapists into the relationship between client and therapist. And sometimes those biases get in the way of the service. And when they do, it is our job as social workers to step back and say, I am being disservice to this session. Now, planners should be thinking the same thing. For example, Okay. Let's say you have a community and all of a sudden you're trying to bring in a treatment into a community, like, for example, protect the bike lane. And you know that protect the bike lanes, you know, the research shows that it's going to protect cyclists from car crashes, and your community is telling you, but no, protected bike lanes are triggers to us. They to us remind us of only a certain population that comes, you know, on protected bike lanes, or protected bike lanes being sort of symptomologies of gentrification that is going to happen, or it's a very drastic change in the built environment that community begins to react in a certain type of way. Now you as a planner are like, girl, but what you mean? I got this degree and I worked for this degree and I read the research and I did this, this, and this, right? And then all of a sudden, planners are gonna, you know, circumvent what community members said and still put in the treatment in there. Yo, that is countertransference and it's not about you. A lot of the times, though our designs may be innovative, though our designs may be in the right spirit, if community members are telling us no, then the answer is no, right? And on the contrary, in liberatory psychology, we value the no. The no should be seen as sacred, because when our clients tell us no as therapists, they are letting us know that they have developed enough cognitive dissonance to say no. That should be taken into consider, you know, should be seen as a good thing. So when community members are telling me no, I'm like, oh, okay, no. Perfect. Let's talk more. Why? You know, that is the important thing. And that's something that planners don't do. Yesterday I was in a conversation with some folks and they were like, oh no, I don't like talking to people. And I was like, oh girl. All right, so we're gonna go into this next section called case management. Y'all are getting lit in this chat box, and I am loving it. I feel very much in community. I love you all. It was very lonely being in the planning program, being an MSW and planning dual degree, and everyone's like, "This makes no sense," and I was like, "It makes sense." All right, so basically, case management is thank y'all so much. Case management is an approach that we use in social work practice. And again, let me also be very mindful and let me put this disclaimer out there that social work practice also has a lot of flaws. There's a lot of social workers who come into the field to rehabilitate people into a system that was never intended for us. My job as a social worker is not to maintain status quo, but rather question it, radicalize it, and change it. So there's also room for social workers to get decolonized. Let me put that out there. And so basically, these are some of the basic aspects of planning. I mean, of case management, right? There's assessment. We come in with our client, we do an eco map. This is what you hear all the time. Tell us about your relationship between you and your mother, you know, things like that. So we're just assessing. Our job as therapists is to understand all the triggers or the history in your situation. To understand all of your history and your triggers and how you begin to then sort of align triggers to then how you process triggers, right? So that's what we do in an assessment, which would be pre-designed. Usually that's when we do most of our engagement. You know, then you have your treatment. And it's basically when in your treatment, you are able to say, this is what I'm hearing. And so now these are the possible ways that we can do something. Now, always the beautiful thing about effective therapy is that this is always in co-creation, right? Very much pedagogy of the oppressed. We are not the ones, again, we're not healing our clients. We are providing the skills and the coping mechanisms so our clients can find healing. We are witnesses and accomplices to someone's healings. We are not someone's healer. All right. And that is your treatment, what we would call our design section. Then there's tracking, which I say it's construction. And tracking basically would be when we're just engaged. This is about this 5th, 6th session with the client. We're just checking in on our goals. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Maybe these treatments aren't working. Let's try a new approach. And so, you know, that's what that is. And then the last section is called termination, and which is will be evaluation. And this happens when, let's say, we are a 12-week program. Termination should be happening by the 9th week. Because by the 9th week, we're having the conversation of grieving. We built a community, we built a relationship. Y'all are so fun. I appreciate you so deeply right now on a Friday during this time. Oh, y'all are too fun. Y'all are too fun. Listen, okay, let me get through this so we can get to the good stuff. Okay, so these are all the different assessments that exist within social work practice, and this is how I translated them over to the planning process. My question to this is, how do we engage community engagement strategies for every phase of the project, in particularly something like construction? Construction is the longest phase of a project, in the phase when community is feeling the most impact. Yes, they were in for this repave me, this street resurfacing during pre-design because they knew it was going to need some good stuff. But then all of a sudden, they started breaking ground and people are complaining about construction. That's when we start talking about, that's when we start dropping information, when we start hearing some of the impact of the work that's going on, right? So that's case management. Okay, cool. This is when we get into the good stuff. Any questions so far, and then I'll start out. This next section is, that podcast energy. Y'all are silly. This next section are examples of how this can come together and what trauma-informed planning looks like. And I would also be remiss if I did not uplift the work of the folks who brought me into this space. And those folks I've learned from Tamika Butler. I get to call Tamika a friend and a mentor. And I've also learned from folks like Dr. Destiny Thomas, who I've gotten to work with. So I would not be remiss, especially as they are Black women, if I did not mention their names into this space. My ancestors would be very mad at me. So giving them a shout out into the world. And also folks who I've met along the way. Nicole Payne with DivCon and at NACDO. That's my girl. I love me some Nicole. All right, because y'all asked. Here is the Venmos. All right, so let's go into this next section. Awesome. So now let me put this disclaimer out there. Oh, yes. When's the podcast coming out? These are all my personal views and my work, y'all, because apparently I have to start saying those things. But so I work for LA Vision Zero. So I'm at the Department of Transportation. And one of the things that happens in Vision Zero is that we have a very hard time in finding out information around crashes as they happen in real time, right? If y'all work, I mean, y'all know this, right? We are dealing with like problems in real time, but because of engagement, because of engagement and how the bureaucracy works, we're dealing with the problems of yesterday and building solutions for tomorrow. And along that process, community has already shifted and changed. So this is called RISE. It's the Rapid Implementation and Survivor Engagement Strategy, and how to work with, and again, this has not been adopted by the department. This is just a draft of what this situation would look like, or this protocol would look like, but it's an important way to think about trauma-informed planning. So now what happens here is there's a crash. We would get a real-time notification of the crash happening, and a team of what I call traffic forensics, which is not a real thing, but I think about like going out there and trying to figure out what happened, would go to the site, do a site visit, and do an assessment for any sort of infrastructure contributors that could have resulted in the crash, right? Y'all are so silly. I heard my phone go off. Y'all are so funny. And so with that site visit, we would go basically to look at infrastructure from signages to pavement to just look at what was in the built environment and what could have contributed to the crash. Now, from there, there's this middle section, what could lead to three different things, right? They could lead to a design lab where folks are coming in and co-creating what can be done to address the crash, a memorialization, right? Because we know that our communities memorialize the dead in many different ways, and the dead are always there. The dead should be honored. My ancestors would be mad if they weren't. And the last one is called the healing space. So this was something very interesting. One of the things that I got to do under the leadership of Dr. Thomas was a healing circle in South Central. Now, this was the first time, and I think might have been the first time in the country that there was a healing circle situation coming out of a DOT, and we basically just showed up in South Central. I mean, didn't just show up, but we went to South Central, built a relationship with the park there, and we were able to talk through like what was going up, and we just showed up, right? We decided to say, let's have a restorative justice session to see what can we do as a department to be better, to be of service. We had planners and engineers, and their job was just to listen. And I got to facilitate a whole 2-hour situation, and it was an honor. And it was a very beautiful conversation. From there, the folks who showed up to that were the folks who actually wanted to be the most involved into the project. Right? Engineers in a healing circle. And to this day, this was about 1.5 years ago, the engineers on our team always talk about that event and how meaningful it was. And I'm just like, y'all, all I did was a group therapy session, and we just listened. And the thing is that nobody warned me that the moment that I acquired a city badge, I was going to acquire city baggage. And that has been a whole situation. Listen. No, not yet. Okay, so this second, again, and this is not a project, but this is kind of getting y'all. So I'm starting to realize, and a lot of folks have been giving me this, and where folks have been telling me that I need to just become my own consultant because they're like, Richard, folks are trying to hire you, not the department. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm sharing this idea, which is coming, right? So one of the things that we noticed was when a supervisor brought this up to me and said, we haven't had any crashes in this corridor for the last 5 years. And then all of a sudden, we had 5 crashes in the same year in this corridor. What is going on? And I was like, 5 crashes in 1 year as opposed to no crashes the last 5 years. That is a constant re-exposure to trauma. And I know that to be a diagnosis of PTSD. So then I was like, you know what? I am done pathologizing people. Let me try to figure out what's happening in the built environment and how do we get to infrastructural PTSD and not communities with PTSD. So then this is what I did. So this is what this chart is, and you can follow along. And again, this is just an idea, and we're trying to get there. So the top part, the diagnosis, these are the criteria that is used to diagnose PTSD. And what we see here, this is for people, the direct exposure was witnessing the trauma, right, from the stressors. Follow along. And then at the bottom, I started building the criteria for intersections, right? A direct exposure to the crash. Unwanted obstructions in the built environment as a result of the crash. How many times do you see a crash happening and you see a bumper laid out in the middle of the road and it's laid out there for a while? That would be an intrusion, right? An intrusion symptom. Avoidance and trauma-related site, the formation of desire lanes that diverge away from the site, right? So this is, again, a way in which we're seeing the fact that intersections can also experience PTSD. And the way to doing this is because we should not be diagnosing communities, but rather really looking at how we can respond to the built environment to address the trauma that community is facing. And again, this is just an idea that started happening and was formulating. It's still not built out, and we're still, maybe I'll find a grant to develop it. And this is my favorite one. So this is called El Camino de Vermont. And one of the things that happened, and then after this, what I'll do, start thinking, if you want to come into a conversation, I'll stop sharing. You can request to share your audio and your video. There's room for 9 people in here. Let's have a roundtable. Here we go. Let's have a conversation. Let's do this. And so El Camino de Vermont, we have a track at the USC Masters of Urban Planning program. And one of the things that we have an arts and culture track. And for me, I wanted to be very mindful of what that looked like, right? Like I did not want to talk about the creative class or art galleries and gentrification. That is a very white woman discourse, or be limited to murals in East LA, right? Like, no, that's not. How do you explain someone like myself who is an artist, who come from South Central, and who also is a gentrifier, right? Like a gentrifier. in so many ways. Also, I love the show Hentified on Netflix because I think it's a great opportunity to have that conversation. I was like, yo, I'm ready for that casting for season 2. I could be a love interest because Latinos in East LA are very different from Latinos in South Central. We are cholas with a neck roll down here. So I really wanted to find a way in which we could talk about art and use art as a community engagement strategy. And so what happened was, again, I take a lot of pride in being a bus rider. And in the middle of this pandemic, I realized that I had stopped riding the bus. One, because I have an able body. So if I wanted to, I could bike to my parents to see my nephew. And second, I had the privilege of working from home. I'm having this conversation with you all from home. And that is a privilege. But there are communities and folks who do not have that privilege. And as someone who talks about social justice, I knew that I had to leverage my power and my privilege. So I needed to find a way to do something about it. So I did this performance art piece called El Camino de Vermont as a way to honor community members, bus drivers, essential workers, mothers, children who have been riding the bus during a global pandemic. We as urban planners should be asking ourselves, what are the conditions that led people to ride the bus in the middle of a global pandemic, and should be addressing those conditions, right? Our communities do not experience the built environment in silos. They don't cross the street and say, all of a sudden, I'm in county jurisdiction, so let me hit up the county agency. Who is the county agency? Girl, I don't even know. So we as planners should be really considering that holistic approach. And so it's my way of leveraging. I created this walk where I walked the entire bus route of Vermont. It was a 12.2 mile walk from the southern end point of the city to the most northern end point of the city to really just engage with the built environment. Again, I talked earlier about how do we begin to shift the built environment from object to subject. Well, do you think it is that it happens where the built environment we become engulfed in the built environment as people? At the pedestrian scale. So what happens if all of a sudden all of our renderings, rather than being from these aerials, right, rather from dissecting this Cartesian model that broke down the body and the built environment as a result, we really looked at what would happen at the pedestrian scale. If we made the pedestrian as the center of truth, not the automobile, not the street, but the pedestrian, what is the design that we get to from there? So for me, what got to there, some of the work that leads to this, right? So at the bottom it says bioreconciliation and city consciousness. So this is where I'm starting to get to in this new work and this new piece. And I'll end it there. But really, again, looking at the fact that for me, what I'm starting to realize is that I am not interested, as someone who worked on a farm in Wisconsin and worked and went to school in Minnesota. I have seen a lot of different built environments and born and raised in South Central. And I am not interested, again, in city, but rather I am interested in the relationship that I have as body to the built environment. And there's so many stories that come alongside with that, right? I have seen so many types of, I also really love this picture because randomly enough, there's a taxi, and girl, it is like a rare sight to see a taxi in LA, So I was like, ooh, and this is New York too. So I'm about to like honor y'all like West Coast meet East Coast. It was funny. So I was like, I'm gonna use this picture. But to me, again, I'm thinking a lot about biomimicry. I love the word biomimicry. I think, or the concept of biomimicry. The only thing is that to me, the word mimicry still implies a dichotomy. It still creates this, like, I am mimicking something I am not. And to me, there's something we need to add to that discourse, because rather than seeing ourselves as observers of the built environment, we are participants of the ecology. Can we talk about how climate change has been showing this, to us recently? Like, that is an urban planning situation. Let's talk about that, right? So for me, it's like what we need is bioreconciliation. We need to understand and reconcile with the fact that we are participants in the ecology and the pedestrian scale, and designing from the pedestrian scale, where the built environment becomes the subject, is the process of reconciliation, right? Like, our ancestors were so in tune with the cosmos because they knew that the cosmos lived within us. So that is bioreconciliation, which gets us to this concept of city consciousness. And city consciousness just basically is a new framework that I'm trying to build that looks at generative somatics. Again, I'm a dancer. And how do we apply those systems to the built environment? My favorite example is thinking of the intersections as joints, right? So the joints in our body, they allow, one of the things that joints do is that they provide viscosity. And viscosity is basically the ability to slow down time. So when you jump, you know, folks are telling you to bend your knees, right? And that's because it spreads out the pressure across your knee joint so you don't hurt and break your patella, right? That's called viscosity. Now, we think about intersections as a way to slow down time and to slow down traffic. What do you think that would look like? We actually have done it before. It's called a roundabout. Roundabouts provide viscosity in traffic flow, right? They slow down time. So becomes then precedent for the idea that we can we kickstart your book? Y'all, I'm just trying to get a job. I love my job, but let me tell you something, y'all. Working in the organizer and an artist, and again with the city baggage, there have been moments and times where I've realized that you know, I love the work that I do. I love my team, but when you're in the bureaucracy, sometimes you get conditioned to protect the system you vow to dismantle, and that's yes, viscosity. Yep, and so that's it. But I'll leave it at that. And here's my contact information. If y'all want to have a conversation, yeah. Porque si no, I'm like, this thing is going to spill too much information and it's going to become a situation. So, folks, feel free, cue into here. Who wants to jump in? Request video. We have 20 minutes left in this session. So please. Okay. Yes, I see someone. Okay, yes, folks are coming in. Let's talk. Hi.
Hey. How's it going? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Jose, I just want to say thank you so much. I mean, I really just came out here to say thank you. Personally, I am a planner by education and some trade, but similar to, you know, the city baggage sentiment, they ran me up out of there. So I switched over to a more healing practice of Reiki, with the intention of, thank you, with the intention of hopefully trying to integrate that into my planning practice. So I just, you know, one of the main things that I came up against when I was kind of like in the system and in the comp, was how do you kind of protect your baby and protect your ideas and vision and try not to get jaded, or even try not to have it stripped from you and they say that they came up with it when it was really all you.
Listen, this is something I don't think I thought about before, really. The only way I've ever thought about it before has been through my art. So I just published my first book of poetry. And thank you. And a lot of it has been, I had to compartmentalize. Like I have some of my coworkers are like, Richard, you should invite us, or you should invite us to your performance. And I'm like, nah, y'all, I can't. And they're like, why not? And I'm like, because I talk shit about y'all. Like I had to compartmentalize, right? You know, I never believed before in owning any of my work because it's kind of frustrating to live in sort of this dichotomy of having to be very capitalist, right? To be anti-capitalist, like owning stuff and ensuring that your work is being protected or whatever. I never cared about that so much, and I was always just kind of like, if it's doing a service for community, then I'm okay. Like I, as a queer person of color, have survived enough. I've built resiliency. I'm okay, you know. And then folks have been like, girl, but you need to pay your rent. And I'm like, you're right. So it's a fine line. Now I only consider protecting my work so the integrity of my work doesn't get tarnished. Because folks will come over here, take your stuff, and like make it go in a direction that you never intended for. And then I think that's the only time and place that I would do it. But yes,
can I ask
yeah.
something?
thing, and so sorry, so I'm Nooper zooming in from New York. Nooper rhymes with super. I also used to work for the city, and I left for very, very similar reasons. So I feel like this is a little bit of a healing circle, right? You know what I hear from folks is the need to have this constellation of care, right? And so what I'm hearing from both of you guys is that there's this need to also have things that are totally just not about your daytime practice that fill your soul and kind of just restore you. And I guess a question that I have for this, because I've seen this in so many folks that I know here in New York that have worked for the city, but also like G is a comic book artist. Daphne sews amazing clothes. Y'all should follow all of this. But do we think that there is a way that we can work for the city and maintain our souls without having to have an external place to feed our own self-care, our own spirit?
Yeah.
No,
For sure. Listen, I think for me, it's like I'm a multimodal activist. Like I'm gonna do what I gotta do within the department. I'm gonna go write what I gotta write within frameworks like APA. I'm gonna go write the poems that I need to write in order to stay whole, right? I really appreciate that you mentioned this constellation of care. And I think boundaries are very important. Recently, I posted this little tweet that went a little viral that says, boundaries are to be seen as invitations and not limitations. Just because I said you can't do 1, 2, and 3, don't mean you can't do 4 through 10. You know what I mean? And so I invite this other conversation, multimodal. Yes. And so for me, I think that's where that framework comes in, right? About having multiple ways to do the work that I do. So when folks ask me, in interviews, Richard, how are you going to like practice self-care? And I was like, as long as I can dance, I'm happy. Just don't mess with my dance. So what I had to do, okay, so y'all, let me give you a real tea. Girl, I ain't salary, I am hourly. You know what I mean? And she got 2 masters and is doing the situation. And I know that I do not work on Wednesdays. Like that is a commitment that I make to myself, because if I worked 5 days a week at the department, y'all, I wouldn't survive. And to me, Wednesday is like my day to do all of my art. And that's where, if I don't work on Wednesdays, then I know that I need to hustle what I just lost that Wednesday in order to make up, just to pay bills. Mm-hmm. But to me, I think that approach is super important. And I always think about what it means just in conversation when folks are like, well, where do you work? And I get to say I work at the city. And they're like, oh my God, you did something, right? Like, oh, wow, good for you. And like, I'm like, y'all don't need to know that my position is like, a little position. Y'all just
listen, I'm a kid of immigrants. When you get a city job, you've made it, right? When you get a city job, that's it, right? Your aunties, your uncles are like, that's it. We good.
Right, exactly. And then you got to be like, no, yeah, tia, but like, I'm not salary girl, so I don't got that pension like you think I do. Like, I don't got that plan, So that's a real conversation. And I understand that just being there and representation is something for my family. So I do understand that. And also, I also understand that, for example, I now have access to public information that folks may not have had before, right? So I get to be very strategic. So I have said before, if you don't like the work that I do, here is the name of the GM of the department. I'm just creating methods of accountability. I didn't say anything that would, I mean.
But I guess a question that I have, and then I'll leave after this because other people need to join too, because there's so much going
conversation.
I feel like we need to really have a real roundtable here. But, I guess a question that I have a follow-up on that is, how do you overcome the fear that I see in young planners that it's like, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to be blacklisted, or like things like that. Like, and I struggle with like mentoring young people around that as well, because there is a fear of abundance. There is a fear of the universe will take care of you. And like, as a kid of immigrants, it's like dollars are dollars, right? So how do you reconcile that?
Yo, I have that fear every day. I'm in fear now. I thought about, even sharing the case studies. Again, these are not things that have been adopted by the department or anything like that, but it's ideas in the work that I had, and I only shared them today because I think they're ideas and projects that really bring in my work as an urban planner, as a social worker. Girl, I sit with that fear all the time. I'm afraid that somebody in this chat is gonna find out and say something or whatever. But I then think about the folks who are being murdered. I think about the lives that we've lost. I think about the resiliency that I have at almost being 30 as a queer person of color from South Central. Like, yo, that is, I've survived something. So I know what fear and like trouble looks like in my communities, and getting fired it's not what trouble looks like in other spaces and communities. So I'm gonna continue the work until, girl, if they let me go, I think I've built enough relationship where somebody would hire me.
Also, I just want to say, I'm going to leave after this, but you left your Venmo name there. I sent you a little something on Venmo because I just want to support you in the work that you are doing. And I hope there are other people in that chat who are talking about how amazing this talk is, that they are Venmoing you right now. And once I hop off, I'm going to put your Venmo in there again. So that we can support you and lift you up around the reality that you're creating, in which we can support each other. So thank you so much.
And again, folks, there's an opportunity for y'all to come back in here, join the conversation. Let's have a roundtable situation. There's my contact information. Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, perfect. So, I wanted to ask this question for oh my God, I just really messed that up. I pressed the play button on my computer. Great. So, I wanted to ask this question because I feel like it will apply to other people other than myself. So I am 22. I'm considering what I want to do for my master's degree. Maybe it's social work, maybe it's urban planning, maybe it's both, probably both. And I know, like, having heard your perspective, and first of all, like, thank you so much for all of this. Your perspective and others who may be recovering from their education in these fields, how would you suggest that someone like me approach that? Just so you'd like, there are things that I know now that I expect to take with me as I, get into these fields. But how do I make sure, like, what suggestions do you have to make sure that I'm constantly, checking myself and also like preparing myself to reconcile what I'm learning in that field with, thoughts of dreaming towards the future and abolition, and like making sure that we are caring for each other in a way that's outside of the academy?
Yeah, so a couple of things. This idea of recovering from urban the education, it's real. Grad school is very traumatizing. And let me tell you, as someone who got a second degree, that third year was a lot. I will say that one of the things that I learned, and so let me be very clear, y'all, like, I graduated in 2019. Like, I came out of the field 1 year in, and all of a sudden, like, I'm out here speaking a Hindsight where, like, 2 years ago, I was trying to attend. You know what I mean? Like, that to me is like, ooh, what an honor. And I take that very, very, and that responsibility very seriously. I think that a lot of the time, again, your lived experience is more than any white person's master's degree is worth, right? Like, don't even, I said it, and I'm hella real, right? Like, I told my classmates, I went to school to USC with a program that was 90% white and 90% transplants, and I went to a program that was literally in my hood. Like, I grew up less than a mile away from campus. So when we talked about, I think about the heaviest day that I had in the planning program was when I discovered what redlining was. And here I am, a grown-ass queer at 28 years old, discovering what redlining was. And I am crying in class. And then I have to go to land use law to talk about zoning. And then I was like, yo, zoning and redlining are the same thing. Like, what you talk about? And I cried and I lost it. And people were like, what's wrong with you, Richard? And I was like, all you white people are my problem. Like, be mindful of how you talk about renters because they're my parents. So you better watch out what you say. Yo, I went off. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities for one, always reminding yourself, like Nupur brought up, like this idea of abundance is important. Remind yourself that your lived experience is worth more than any education. There are ways that we can take care of each other. And again, the only way that I am able to have this conversation now is because folks like Dr. Destiny Thomas, Tamika Butler, Garo Vera, and like, you know, folks from Pueblo Planning, like the folks who have taken care of me are the folks that have allowed me to be in this space. And if there's something that I've learned, especially in the world of transportation planning, is that if you are a transportation planner of color, we got your back. So I got your back. Whatever you need, please let me know. My email, I am of service to be here to have your back. Because this field, we need more folks like us, and there's not going to be a lot of opportunities created for us. So we need to create them for each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Of course. Y'all, we have like 5 minutes left. Thank you all. This was really fun, y'all. I just had a little bit of a party situation. Listen, I am here to advocate for our joy, to create conditions of joy for our communities. Yes, there's a lot of work that needs to get done, but I am here to just bring more joy in these last 5 minutes. Y'all really enjoyed that music that I was playing. If there are no more questions, I mean, feel free to keep asking them. I will put in my contact information up again one more time. Oh, okay. I see somebody. Yes. Also, this is the book that I just published. If you're interested. Yeah, it's a book of poetry. I'm telling y'all, I had to write poems. Hi, Emily.
Hi. I just want to say I came in a little bit late, so I kind of missed your presentation. But wow, I've been saying this in the chat. I feel like I'm at church, even though I've never really gone to church. I feel like I'm in a sermon, and I admittedly watch a lot of YouTube, and I want to know if you have a YouTube channel or when you're going to start creating content on YouTube, because I would watch that shit every fucking day.
Listen, so here's an idea. Okay, so community, let me be real, y'all. Let me be real, community. So one of the things, again, I come from community organizing, and one of the things that I wanted to do is I actually created the syllabus in this class called Community Organizing for Urban Planners. And because I really believe that within the planning field, there's room for advocacy, but we're not trained to be advocates. Like, what does power mapping look like? What does a power analysis look like? How do you create strategy? How do you, build a campaign? So I created the syllabus. It was created by community. Like, community came in with the case studies, with the reading. So I owe it to community, and then all of it was supposed to be taught at USC. That's where the opportunity came from. But the department, and it's not nobody there in particular, it's just a policy that exists within the department that says that adjunct professors can't create new courses because of quality assurance. And I'm like, well, okay, policies like that make it impossible to really address the gaps that are needed in curriculum. And I will say that the department chair is advocating for me, and I was like, welcome to being an organizer. But the course is still there, and I created this whole course rooted in co-creation. Literally, let me pull out the books. This is the main book.
Oh, Adrian.
Yes, Emergent Strategy. Hello. The other book that we were going to be reading is right over here, The Wretched of the Earth, because we need to be Frantz Fanon. And then the other, I am like literally such an academic. Well, here's the crown. Let me put on the crown for you all. But then the other book was The Power of Place by Dolores Hayden. So the syllabus is created, and now we're just looking for a way to put it on a platform. my goal would be to make it into a course, and I'm trying to find ways that maybe I can work with an APA or something to offer it for CME credits. But listen, I also want to make it accessible. So I was like,
it out of the institution. Take
I'm
it
okay
out
with
of
that
the
too. I'm like,
institution.
I am down to pay for like the Zoom subscription. Like we'll do it.
Crowd course amongst these folks to take that course with you.
Listen, I'm so
100%.
down. And I'm so down. And then the thing I was going to do after was like, to your point about the YouTube, I was like, this is something that we should put on together. So after every session, I was just going to do like a 6-minute video recap of what we learned that day. And so the course really brings in community organizing skills plus non-conventional paradigms within the field. Like we were going to talk about futurism. We were going to talk about rural futurism, because one of the conversations that comes up a lot in the field is that we need a sign-up list. One of the conversations that comes up in the field, right, is that the urban that within the next 50 years, like over 80% of the world population is going to live in urban settings. And I'm like, y'all, no, that's not how displacement works. If we know how water displacement works, water just gets pushed out the way for new things to come into the built environment, right? That's how water works. And so what's going to happen is actually the demographic of rural communities is going to shift. We're seeing that happen now when communities can no longer afford urban centers, so they move out to places like Lancaster. They move out of the city, and it's going to continue to happen. And we're going to then start changing how rural communities look like. As someone who lived on a farm, we also can build infrastructure for rural communities so that the communities can sustain themselves. So that's a conversation. I think the conversation I wanted to add up into this syllabus was also looking at how, girl, let's look at these these exit polls that are coming in from the election, right? We're seeing that a lot of these counties, and I said this on Twitter, I was like, I'm gonna start blaming this election on gentrifiers. Y'all need to go back home to these suburbs and organize your tias. Like y'all,
yes.
Like, don't worry about LA. We'll still keep our 55 electoral votes. Y'all need to go back and figure out what's happening over there, right? And so
I saw this thing on Instagram that was like calling all white people to like get out of your nonprofit jobs to help Black and Brown communities and go fucking help your own white people to organize.
I was like, white women, y'all need to show up twice as hard because 55% of y'all did it. And that's not to say that I'm not going to hold accountable the 32% of Latinos who voted. Like, I got my work to do too. You know what I mean? But I definitely think that there is a correlation between gentrification and what we saw in the polls. And so that's a new thing to think through. We were going to talk a lot about also teachings on decolonizing urban planning. Like, let's be real. I mean,
yeah. It's a white institutional canon. I mean, come on. There's no which way or but.
Like, can we talk about the fact that during the Salem witch trials, like, women were accused of being witches so the men could take the property away? That's called urban planning. Listen. So
I have a question. In terms of like, if you do this curriculum or like the curriculum sounds amazing. You've done it. Like, once you hold the classes, will there also be opportunities for like storytelling? There was like, when Kara Page was talking about like political education as memory work, as place-based work, as like sharing our experiences, that is like as important or more than like the white ivory tower of the theory and the like published word, right?
Most definitely. I mean, there has to be a component of storytelling, especially as an artist. Like, that's the only way that I see the work happening. I mean, girl, I'm still sitting here with this damn rebozo a Rosario and a crown on. You know what I mean? Oh, girl, we are at time. But the one thing I will say that one of my favorite assignments of this course is basically called creating the counter narrative, where folks are think about their identities and their relationship to power and privilege, because we all have it. And then the last part is a commitment to leverage power. And so it's this notion of we're going to commit to creating the counter narrative. And what does that look like? And this really comes from being an artist, because I'm like, yo, this trope of the gay white shirtless man, girl, that motif is played out. Like, nah, y'all ain't nothing cute. So, all right. Okay, I'm gonna post my contact information one more time. But thank you so much, Emily, and thank you to everyone who joined this. I appreciate all of you all. Happy Friday. Keep laughing and much joy to everyone. Besitos.